I'm Ross. Welcome to another edition of Skate Through the Bible. Last episode we left off with Israel had 12 sons. So yes, he did. Those are the 12 tribes of Israel that you may or may not have heard of. But anyway, so of those 12 sons, there's one very significant one named Joseph. He was Israel's favorite son because it's kind of obvious because he makes him this super cool coat, the coat of many colors, and it's like all super bad to the bone. And his other 11 brothers were very jealous of him. And so one day they're out roaming around, feeding goats and watering sheep and whatever it is that they do out there on the Tinderland. And their brothers are conspiring. They're like, you know what, we don't like Joseph because he's a brat and Dad likes him more. We should get rid of him. So along come some Egyptians and they're like, hey, let's sell him into slavery to the Egyptians. So they're like, hey, Egyptians, do you want to buy our brother as a slave? And they're like, sure. So they buy Joseph, and they take him off into slavery. That's so messed up. But anyway, that's what happened. And they go back and they tell Dad, hey, Dad, we don't know what happened to Joseph, man. He got eaten by an animal or something. Like, he's gone. Sorry. And so, Israel, he's all distraught because his favorite son is what he thinks killed. But his other 11 sons actually sold him into slavery. So fast forward a whole bunch, and there's a famine in the land. And so meanwhile, Joseph's over there in slavery in Egypt, but he's such a good servant, and he's still so loyal to God, and God blesses him, and he ends up working his way up the ranks from slavery up into some political command, and he ends up being like the second in command under the Pharaoh of Egypt. He's basically the vice Pharaoh, if you will. And so he's in charge of everything. And he's like, hey, Pharaoh, I think since this is all prosperous times, we should stockpile a bunch of food in the silos in case there's a famine. And of course there is a famine. And so he does this. So they got all kinds of food. They're loaded. They were preppers, like preppers back in the day. So they got all kinds of food all stocked up. Meanwhile, back at home, there's a famine. And they're like, oh my gosh, there's a famine. We don't have any food. What are we going to do? Hey, I heard that there's a bunch of food in Egypt, not knowing that Joseph was in charge of it. Why don't we go to Egypt and see if they'll give us a food basket? Okay, so they cruise over to Egypt, and guess who they run into? Yep, it's Joseph, their brother. And at first he's messing with him. He's like, yeah, I don't know, man. You guys sold me into slavery. But then eventually he goes, yeah, okay, that's cool. I forgive you. Yeah, here's some food. Go back to town, get Dad, grab the RV and all the animals and everybody, cruise up on in here. And you guys can hang here because we're prosperous and we got plenty of food. So they all pack up and they move to Egypt. And they live happily ever after for a while. And then all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, after several generations, those people pass, of course, and then their descendants are still there living in Egypt. And as they're living in Egypt, and then there's another Pharaoh that comes along, and the new Pharaoh's like, I don't know who these Hebrew people are. What's up with these guys, these Israelites, these Hebrews? I don't like them. They're different from us. Let's mistreat them and take them into slavery and make them make bricks. And so they were treating them really poorly. And meanwhile, Moses, he was, there's a whole bit different story about Moses we'll get into later. But so Moses is one of the Hebrews, and God comes to him and he says, hey, this is bogus, the way my people are being treated, so go to the Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. Well, I'm not putting up with this. My people are out. We're going to bounce. So Moses goes to the Pharaoh and says, hey, you know what? You're being totally bogus to our peeps, and so we're going to bounce up out of here. And Pharaoh's like, no, you're not. He's like, yeah, we are. You're not. Yeah, we are. God said, I don't care. So then there's this whole battle that goes on. God's like, well, if you don't let my people go, I'm going to do all these plagues. There was frogs involved. There's lice involved. Water turned to blood. There was the killing of the firstborn children of the Egyptians, and all kinds of madness transpired. So finally, Pharaoh's like, okay, fine, you Hebrews, get out of here because you're just causing problems. So they up and bail, but then after they left, Moses got all the Israelites and they're cruising through the desert. And all of a sudden Pharaoh's like, yeah, I changed my mind. Let's chase after him. So all of a sudden, they got like this Egyptian army chasing after them. And they're like, through the desert, and they come up to an ocean, not an ocean, a sea, the Red Sea. And all the people, all the children of Israel are like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Moses, you brought us out here to die. Ah. And so he prays, and God's like, go ahead and walk through the sea. I'm going to part it for you. So they part the Red Sea. They walk through it on dry land. So he basically takes the water, pushes it across, makes a big old dry place for them to cruise through. And they all cruise through this dry place. And then the Egyptians are chasing after them in their chariots and the horses. And then the chariots and the horses and the Pharaoh and everybody, they all get up into the middle of the sea. And then God goes, lets the water go and drowns them all. Bam! And that's archaeologically true, because if you go to the Red Sea today, there's actually artifacts of chariots and horse skeletons and armor and whatnot in the bottom of the Red Sea. So in case you think, oh, that was just a story somebody made up, well, it's actually archaeologically provable. But anyway, so moving right along, Moses is cruising through, and he's got the people of Israel. And he's like, okay, now what, God? So God's like, all right, come over here. You're going to come up here to Mount Sinai and have a chat with me. And so he goes up there, and God says, all right, here's what we're going to do. First of all, we need to lay down some ground rules. So here's some 10 commandments, and lays down the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, don't covet your neighbor's wife, yada, yada, the rest of them. We'll go through that later in subsequent episodes. Don't do this and don't do that, and so lays down some laws. He comes back down from Mount Sinai, and all the people were already violating pretty much most of the laws that he just said don't do. And so he has a temper tantrum, busts the commandments that are inscribed on stone tablet, and God's like, all right, Moses, get back up here, let's do this again. So he does it again, writes out all the law, and comes back down and lays down the law, and so that is where we come to the conclusion of the book of Genesis and Exodus.